impact of Trump-era U.S. policies on Britain's strategic calculations?
I think it's very positive. I think President Trump, for 8 years now, 8 years or more, has been encouraging NATO, the other NATO partners, and the Western European countries to increase their defense spending, to take more responsibility for their role as NATO members. And I think you're finally starting to see that. And I think from a defense and security perspective, I think this UK-EU alignment is very positive. And I think that the president has had some effect there. Again, he's been talking about it for quite some time. I think with the Ukraine situation, it's probably pushed the European countries to be a little bit more aggressive. So I think that's good news. I think the Trump effect is pretty meaningful when it comes to defense and security spending. Peace through strength is his philosophy, much like it was for Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher a generation ago. So I think that's good news. I think the concern is more on the economic front, where you're seeing a bit of realignment with the EU, and the critics will say that it's almost rejoining the EU. But from a defense and security perspective, this is good news.
Mm-hmm. Professor Jacquet, how does this reset affect Europe's relations with the United States, in your own opinion?
Well, I think it will make the relations of some EU countries with Washington more difficult. Maybe France, for example, would face more difficulties. With Germany, we'll see. It could be the case. Not all EU countries are following exactly the same strategy when it comes to the relations with Russia or the conflict in Ukraine, or even the ties they have with the current US government. So maybe we may see in the future as well the rise of, let's say, sub-blocks within the European Union, which could at the same time threaten the unity and coherence of the European Union.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mr. Swenson, back again to you. Will this reset, or as you call it, repeat, help or hinder UK-US relations, especially if Trump returns to other policies in the White House?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a major challenge or headwind to the U.S.-UK relationship. I do think it's a mistake, somewhat re-entering the EU regulatory scheme. But I think what's most important to President Trump is to keep the UK markets open to the U.S., as was agreed a few weeks ago. And then, of course, you have to keep in mind, this is always about China. I think one of the concerns that President Trump has is the UK being completely open to business with China, or unchanged versus the prior trading relationship. And it's important to keep Russia and China from aligning too much, and that's always important in the background. So doing business with the U.S. And the UK, between the U.S. and the UK, as well as between the U.S. and the EU, is important. But it's also important to keep China in mind on just about every topic.
Mm-hmm. China is an important aspect in this. Now, Professor Jacquet, how could this agreement influence Europe's response to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it's very difficult right now to predict how it will impact the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine, because you have a lot of, in a way, contradictory initiatives. You have the US and other countries, non-European countries, hoping or pushing for peace, while you have EU members or NATO members, like France, for example, or UK as a NATO member, opposed to that. And recently as well, with regard to the recent reset of negotiations, some experts or even some officials, especially in Russia, said, well, we are just reporting where we had stopped when Mr. Johnson came and disrupted the negotiation in 2022.
Mr. Swenson, how do you see the future of UK-EU cooperation evolving in the face of global instability, especially that you have just mentioned China now as a key factor in this issue?
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that the trading bloc remains in place. I think it's an opportunity for the UK, as long as they don't roll back into the European Union style regulatory regime. I think if they do trade, that's great, as long as that's free and fair trade. I don't think that's what Keir Starmer has done here. I think he felt pressure to do some sort of a deal. But I think in the future, you know, that relationship obviously is a good one, you know, given the geography of it all. And I do think that the EU can remain as a pretty powerful trading bloc, but it's not the only game in town. You know, the East is growing at a, you know, rapid pace. I think
Yes,
global